February 10th is not just another date passing quietly on the calendar. It is a moment weighted with spiritual significance, a threshold where the unseen realm has been holding its breath. For a long time now, heaven has been quiet. Many have felt it but could not explain it. The prayers that seemed to echo back unanswered. The sense that something was paused, suspended, waiting. This silence was not absence. It was not neglect. It was restraint. And tonight, that restraint is being lifted. Archangel Michael speaks with urgency now, because what is about to be released is not a gentle whisper meant to be revisited later. It is a final signal from God Himself, sent in mercy before consequence, sent in love before loss. There are seasons when God speaks loudly, clearly again and again. And there are seasons when He withdraws His voice, not because He has abandoned His people, but because He is watching how they move without constant instruction. Silence in heaven always precedes movement on earth. Before walls fall, before destinies turn, before judgment or breakthrough, there is often a holy quiet. That is where we have been. And if you are listening to this now, it is because you were meant to hear what breaks that silence tonight. Archangel Michael did not come with casual messages. He is not sent for routine encouragement or everyday reminders. He is dispatched in moments of spiritual conflict, in turning points where obedience or delay alters outcomes. The message he carries now is clear and heavy. God is giving you one final signal tonight. Not because He is cruel, but because He is precise. Not because He is finished with you, but because time-sensitive obedience is required. This is not about fear. This is about alignment. Many will scroll past this. Many will dismiss it as dramatic or symbolic. But some of you felt something shift the moment you heard the title. Your spirit reacted before your mind could analyze. That is because this message is not for everyone. It is for those who have been standing in uncertainty, those who sensed the quiet and wondered if they had done something wrong, those who have been waiting for clarity while feeling the weight of delay. Heaven has been quiet because heaven was watching. And now heaven is speaking because the moment demands a response. February 10th marks a line in the spirit. On one side is prolonged silence, confusion, and stalled movement. On the other side is instruction, direction, and renewed communication. God does not threaten. He warns. He signals. He calls before He allows distance to settle in. When Archangel Michael says that if this message is ignored, the silence that follows will not be broken easily, it is not meant to produce panic. It is meant to awaken seriousness. There are silences that are restful, and there are silences that are consequential. This warning is about the latter. Some of you have been asking God for a sign, not realizing that the delay itself was the sign. Others have been busy filling the silence with noise, distractions, excuses, rationalizations, hoping that clarity would come without change. But tonight, the signal is not hidden. It will not require deep interpretation. It will land directly on the place you have been avoiding, the decision you have postponed, the obedience you have delayed. God is not asking for perfection. He is asking for response. Understand this clearly. The silence you experienced was mercy. It was space given for repentance, for reflection, for realignment. But mercy does not remove responsibility. When God speaks after silence, what He says carries weight. Ignoring it does not make it disappear. It simply shifts you into a season where clarity becomes harder to access. Not impossible, but not easily broken. That is why this moment matters. Archangel Michael's presence signals that spiritual resistance hath been active around you. There hath been opposition to your next step, interference meant to keep you undecided, numb, or distracted. The quiet was not only from heaven, it was also enforced by warfare. But that warfare is being exposed now. Light is breaking through the stillness. And with that light comes choice. This is not about religion. It is not about performance. It is about timing. God speaks in moments, and moments pass. When he sends a final signal, it is because he knows what follows if it is ignored. He sees further than you do. He understands what silence will do to your faith, your clarity, your endurance if you remain unmoved. So he interrupts the quiet one last time. If you feel unsettled listening to this, that is not condemnation. That is conviction calling you back into alignment. If you feel a stirring, a sense of urgency mixed with hope, that is recognition. Your spirit knows this voice. Tonight is not meant to end in fear. It is meant to begin in obedience. Heaven has been quiet until now. But now, the silence is breaking. And what you do with this signal will determine whether the next season is marked by guidance, or by waiting in a quiet that will not be broken easily. When God allows silence, it is never random, and it is never empty. Silence is one of his most misunderstood tools. Many assume that when heaven is quiet, it means God is distant or displeased. But throughout history, divine silence has often been the space where faith is tested, motives are revealed, and alignment is examined. Before God speaks again, he watches how we move when we do not hear him clearly. February 10th stands at the end of such a season. To understand the weight of this final signal, you must first understand why God allows silence at all. Silence strips away dependency on constant reassurance. When God speaks continually, people can begin to rely on the voice more than the obedience that follows it. Silence exposes whether we truly trust God or only trust clarity. In quiet seasons, intentions rise to the surface. Do we continue to walk in integrity when no new instruction comes, or do we drift, assuming delay means permission? Heaven's quiet reveals what noise often hides. There is a pattern woven all through Scripture and spiritual history: silence before movement, quiet before command, stillness before shift. Before major transitions, God often withdraws his voice not to confuse, but to prepare. Silence forces us to confront what we already know but have not acted on. It presses unresolved obedience to the surface. Many prayers go unanswered not because God did not hear them, but because the answer requires a response that has already been delayed. For some of you, the silence hath been uncomfortable. You felt stalled. You felt unsure. You kept asking God for confirmation, for another sign, for a clearer direction. But deep down, you already knew what he was asking. Silence does not erase instruction. It magnifies it. The longer heaven is quiet, the louder the unresolved calling becomes in the soul. That is why this moment feels heavy. It is not new information arriving. It is old truth demanding action. God's silence is also a form of protection. If he continued speaking while we ignored him, our hearts would become hardened to his voice. Silence preserves reverence. It prevents overfamiliarity. It reminds us that God is not a background sound to be tuned in and out at convenience. When he speaks, it matters. When he is quiet, it matters just as much. February 10th arrives as the breaking point between those two states. Many misunderstand silence as abandonment and fill it with substitutes. They chase distractions, opinions, and noise to avoid the discomfort of stillness. But noise numbs discernment. It dulls sensitivity. That is why some people completely miss the moment when God finally speaks again. They trained themselves not to listen. This is why Archangel Michael's message carries urgency. It is not only about hearing the signal, It is about being ready to receive it. Silence also separates the attentive from the distracted. Those who remain spiritually alert during quiet seasons are the ones who recognize the shift immediately. Others require repeated shaking, louder warnings, or consequences before they pause. God's desire is always that His people respond early, not after loss. This final signal is mercy aimed at prevention, not punishment. If you are hearing this now, it is because the silence did not dull your spirit completely. Something in you stayed awake. Something kept listening to you when nothing seemed to be said. That is why this message matters. God is not revisiting the silence to shame you. He is ending it to realign you. But alignment requires movement. This is where your role becomes active, not passive. Heaven does not break silence so we can simply observe it. God speaks so we can respond. And response often begins with acknowledgement. Acknowledging that this message reached you on purpose. Acknowledging that delay is a cost. Acknowledging that obedience cannot be postponed indefinitely without consequence. That is why it is important not to keep this message to yourself. Silence spreads when warnings are ignored, but clarity spreads when truth is shared. If this is resonating with you, take a moment now to engage. Like this message so it reaches others standing at the same crossroads. Share it with someone who hath been feeling the same quiet and doesn't understand why. Subscribe to this channel so you stay connected to what God is revealing in this season. And leave a comment declaring that you are choosing awareness over distraction, response over delay. These are not empty actions. They are signals of alignment. God allows silence to prepare hearts, but He breaks silence to prompt decisions. February 10th is not just about hearing God again. It is about proving that when He speaks, you are willing to move. The quiet season has done its work. It has revealed where you stand. Now the signal is coming not to inform you, but to activate you. Archangel Michael's final signal is not a sound you hear with your ears. It is a movement you feel in your spirit. Throughout history, when God sent Michael, it was never casual. He was sent when boundaries were being crossed, when decisions carried eternal weight, when hesitation could no longer be afforded. This moment is no different. The signal being released tonight is not dramatic in appearance, but it is decisive in impact. It is subtle enough to be ignored and strong enough to change everything, depending entirely on how you respond. Many imagine God's signals as external signs, doors slamming shut, miraculous interruptions, or visible wonders. But more often than not, God's most serious warnings arrive internally. A sudden heaviness, an unexplainable urgency, a disruption of peace around a specific issue you have avoided. Archangel Michael's signal often manifests as conviction rather than spectacle. It presses on the exact area where obedience has been delayed, not to accuse, but to awaken. This final signal is different from the nudges you felt before. Those were invitations. This is a line being drawn. Earlier signals gave room for negotiation, for gradual change, for preparation. This one calls for decision. That is why it feels sharper, clearer, and more pressing. God is not asking you to figure everything out. He's asking you to stop standing still. Archangel Michael stands for divine order and spiritual defense. When he speaks, it is because disorder has gone on long enough. Something in your life has remained unresolved, out of alignment, or delayed past its season. Heaven has observed patience. Heaven has extended grace. Now heaven is signaling closure on indecision. This does not mean judgment is coming. It means movement is required to avoid stagnation. Pay close attention to what has been surfacing repeatedly in your thoughts. the conversation you keep postponing, the habit you keep justifying, the step you know you should take but fear the cost of. God's final signal does not introduce a new subject. It illuminates the one already present. That is how you recognize it. Truth you can no longer ignore. Direction you can no longer rationalize away. Some of you may feel resistance rising even as you listen. That resistance is not coming from God. It is the friction between where you are and where you are being called. Delay always feels safer than obedience until delay becomes disobedience. Archangel Michael's warning is not that God will leave you, but that prolonged silence can settle in when warnings are repeatedly ignored. Silence does not mean God stops caring. It means He allows you to experience the consequences of distance. This is why tonight matters. The signal is time-sensitive. It does not linger indefinitely. God speaks when hearts are most able to respond. If the moment passes, the next opportunity for clarity may come through struggle instead of instruction. That is what makes this a mercy moment. God is offering direction before difficulty, alignment before correction. Do not wait for a louder sign. Do not ask for a second confirmation. The very fact that this message reached you is part of the signal. The stirring you feel is intentional. The discomfort is purposeful. God is not trying to scare you into obedience. He is trying to spare you from unnecessary silence. Understand this clearly. Responding does not require perfection. It requires willingness. A step, not a leap. A yes, not a full plan. God meets movement with clarity. He does not give clarity to those who refuse to move. That is why silence often breaks only after obedience begins. Archangel Michael's role is not to condemn, but to protect. This warning is protection disguised as urgency. It is heaven's way of saying, do not stay here. You are being called forward, out of pause, out of delay, out of indecision. The signal is not about punishment. It is about preservation. As this message settles in, do not rush past it. Let it land. Let it search you. Let it expose what needs to change. What comes next depends on how you respond to what you are hearing now. Hold on. What comes next changes everything. Type I am ready in the comments if this resonates with you. Blessing code 314 is now activated. As this signal reaches your heart, hear this clearly. When you support this work, you are not supporting a channel. You are helping God reach souls standing at the edge of silence. I hear the Lord say, as you sow into my light, I will make you a light where darkness once surrounded you. This message travels because faithful hands release oil into the lamp. When you give through Super Thanks, membership, or PayPal, link in the description, and shown by the QR code, you become part of the harvest this word is awakening. This is not a donation. It is a prophetic response to what God is doing right now. I bless every giver as a carrier of clarity and protection. Do it now, and let obedience unlock what heaven is already preparing. Ignoring divine instruction has a cost that many do not recognize until much later. It rarely looks dramatic at first. There is no immediate collapse, no thunder, no instant loss. Instead, it begins quietly, almost imperceptibly, with a subtle shift in sensitivity. What once felt clear becomes cloudy. What once stirred conviction becomes easier to dismiss. This is how distance forms, not through rebellion alone, but through repeated delay. When God speaks and we hesitate, the danger is not that He stops loving us, but that we slowly stop responding. There is an important difference between rejection and negligence. Rejection is a conscious refusal. Negligence is a postponed obedience disguised as waiting. Many people believe they are being patient when, In reality, they are being avoidant. God sees the heart clearly. He knows when waiting is faithful and when waiting is fear-based. The cost of negligence is often higher than outright refusal because it dulls awareness while maintaining the illusion of faithfulness. Scripture and spiritual history are filled with examples of ignored warnings, not because God wanted to punish, but because people underestimated the weight of timing. Opportunities missed did not disappear because they were evil. They disappeared because they were season-specific. When a door closes due to delay, it is not locked in anger. It is sealed in order. God is a God of sequence. When steps are skipped or postponed too long, alignment is disrupted. One of the greatest dangers of ignoring divine instruction is mistaking comfort for safety. Comfort often settles in when movement is required. Familiar routines, predictable environments, and manageable struggles can feel safer than obedience that demands change. But comfort is not confirmation. God rarely confirms stagnation. When He speaks, it is usually to lead us out, not to keep us contained. Ignoring instruction also affects spiritual discernment. The more warnings are dismissed, the quieter conviction becomes. This does not mean conscience disappears. It means it becomes easier to override. Over time, what once felt wrong begins to feel normal. What once caused discomfort becomes routine. This is not because God stopped speaking truth, but because the heart adjusted to silence. Another cost is delayed fruit. Obedience carries momentum. When acted upon quickly, it opens doors, accelerates growth, and produces clarity. When delayed, that momentum stalls. Progress becomes slow and frustrating. Many people blame spiritual opposition or external circumstances for lack of breakthrough, not realizing that unresolved obedience is the real blockage. God's instruction is often the key, not the reward. There is also a relational cost. When God speaks and is consistently ignored, intimacy suffers. Communication becomes strained, not because God withdraws love, but because trust is impacted. Trust is built through responsiveness. Just as in human relationships, when one party speaks and the other continually delays response, closeness weakens. God desires relationship, not compliance, but relationship requires engagement. Some fear that responding late disqualifies them completely. That is not true. God is merciful. Redemption is always available. But delayed obedience often requires restoration before advancement. Time is spent repairing what could have been built earlier. Energy is used to regain ground that might have been gained effortlessly. This is why warnings are given, not to threaten loss, but to prevent unnecessary struggle. Ignoring instruction also affects those connected to you. Obedience is rarely isolated. Decisions ripple outward. When God speaks to one person, it is often because others will be impacted by their response. Delay can slow down not only personal progress, but collective movement. This is why spiritual responsibility matters. Your obedience is not only about you. It is important to understand that God does not repeat warnings endlessly. Not because He is impatient, but because repeated warnings lose their impact. At some point, silence becomes the teacher. Consequences become the lesson. This is what makes Archangel Michael's message so serious. He is a mercy-filled interruption before silence deepens. If you have felt a growing sense of urgency, restlessness, or inner tension, it is not random. It is the weight of unresponded instruction pressing for resolution. God is not waiting for you to feel ready. He is waiting for you to move. Readiness often comes after obedience, not before. This part of the message is not meant to produce guilt. Guilt paralyzes. Conviction mobilizes. The purpose of understanding the cost is not to shame you, but to awaken clarity. You still have a choice. Awareness itself is an act of grace. The fact that you are hearing this means the door is not fully closed. God's warnings are never about destruction. They are about direction. When He speaks firmly, it is because what lies ahead matters too much to leave to chance. Ignoring divine instruction does not cancel God's plan, but it can delay your participation in it. And delay, when prolonged, becomes its own form of loss. This is why tonight matters. Not because God is impatient, but because alignment is still possible. The cost of ignoring the signal is not immediate collapse. It is prolonged silence, slowed progress, and avoidable struggle. The invitation is still open. The instruction is still clear. And the moment to respond has not yet passed. This message is not for the casual listener, and that distinction matters more than most realize. Not every word God releases is meant for every ear. Some messages are general encouragements, while others are precision instructions aimed at specific hearts. This is one of those moments. If you are listening merely out of curiosity, the words may sound intense, but distant. But if you are listening and feel exposed, unsettled, or deeply seen, it is because this signal was directed toward you intentionally. There is a spiritual sensitivity required to receive certain messages. God does not force awareness. He responds to openness. Those who are distracted, hardened, or uninterested will hear the sound but miss the meaning. That does not make them bad people. It simply means they are not positioned to receive what is being released. This message finds those who have been wrestling internally, those who sensed the silence and wondered if it was personal, those who have felt a quiet tension they could not name. You may have noticed that not everyone around you feels what you feel. Others seem comfortable, unbothered, moving on without concern. Meanwhile, you feel an internal pull, a sense that something unfinished is hovering over your life. That is not anxiety. That is awareness. God speaks differently to those who are listening for Him. When He sends a targeted signal, it often feels isolating because few around you will understand the urgency you feel. Discomfort is one of the clearest indicators that a message is meant for you. Comfort rarely provokes change. Discomfort forces evaluation. When God addresses something directly, it unsettles what hath been tolerated too long. That unease is not meant to push you away. It is meant to draw you closer to truth. The heart that resists discomfort often remains unchanged. The heart that leans into it grows. Another sign this message is for you is repetition. The same themes have been appearing again and again, in prayers, conversations, thoughts, or interruptions you did not expect. God often repeats what we have not responded to, not because He enjoys repetition, but because He is patient. When repetition intensifies, it signals urgency. This message is not arriving in isolation. It is part of a pattern you have already noticed. This message is also not for those looking for excuses. It is for those who want clarity, even if clarity demands sacrifice. Casual listeners seek reassurance without change. This message demands movement. That is why it feels weighty. God is not offering comfort without cost to hear. He is offering direction that requires courage. There is also a separation happening in this moment, not between good and bad people, but between those who are willing to respond and those who prefer delay. Separation is not rejection. It is distinction. God often narrows His audience when precision matters. He speaks broadly when encouragement is needed, and narrowly when obedience is required. If you feel a strong urge to dismiss this message quickly, that may be resistance. Resistance often disguises itself as logic. It questions tone, timing, or delivery to avoid aggressing the content. But logic without discernment can become a shield against obedience. God does not always speak in ways that feel convenient or comfortable. He speaks in ways that cut through defenses. Another indicator that this message is meant for you is the sense of being at a crossroads. You may feel that staying the same is no longer sustainable, but moving forward feels uncertain. Attention is the birthplace of decision. God often speaks most clearly when options narrow and delay becomes uncomfortable. The crossroads is where clarity demands choice. This message is also not meant for spectators. It is meant for participants. God is not narrating your life from a distance. He is inviting you into alignment. That invitation carries responsibility. Ignoring it does not mean the invitation was never real. It means the opportunity was not embraced. You may wonder why this message feels so personal when it is being heard by many. That is how God works. He speaks one message that lands differently in each heart. Those meant to receive it feel as though it was written for them alone. That is not coincidence. That is precision. It is important not to compare your reaction to others. Some will feel immediate conviction. Others will feel quiet confirmation. Both are valid responses. What matters is not how you feel, but what you do with what you feel. God measures response, not reaction. This message is not for those seeking entertainment, distraction, or background noise. It is for those who sense that something is ending and something else must begin. It is for those who know that silence has lingered long enough and that remaining unchanged is no longer an option. If you are still listening at this point, it is because this message has already passed the surface level. It has reached a deeper place. That is not accidental. God is precise with his signals, and when a message finds the right heart, it does not simply inform, it prepares. This part of the message is meant to clarify one thing above all else. You are not hearing this by chance. You are not here because you happened to click at the right time. You are here because awareness was required. What comes next will build on that awareness, and how you respond will determine whether this message becomes a turning point or simply another moment that passed quietly. The silence that follows disobedience is not the same as the silence that precedes instruction. This distinction is critical. Before God speaks, silence is often filled with anticipation. After God speaks and is ignored, silence carries weight. It is heavier, longer, and harder to interpret. When Archangel Michael warns that the silence that follows will not be broken easily, he is not describing abandonment. He is describing consequence, not punishment, but the natural result of resisted alignment. When God's instruction is delayed repeatedly, communication does not usually stop suddenly. It fades. The sharpness of conviction softened. The clarity that once cut through confusion becomes blurred. People often mistake this fading for peace, believing that if the urgency disappeared, the issue must no longer matter. But false peace is one of the most dangerous forms of silence. It settles in quietly and convinces you that stillness equals approval. This type of silence often leads to wandering. Not dramatic rebellion, but subtle drifting. Your action feels unclear. Progress feels slow. Motivation weakens. You may still pray, still believe, still hope, but something feels stalled. This is what happens when instruction is known but unacted upon. Heaven is not silent because it has nothing to say. It is silent because what was said remains unanswered. The silence that follows disobedience can also create confusion about God's character. Some begin to question whether they heard him correctly in the first place. Others assume they imagined the urgency. But God does not retract truth to make us more comfortable. When clarity fades after delay, it is not correction. It is distance. Distance that can be closed, but not without intentional return. There are moments when God allows silence to become a teacher. When words are ignored, experience steps in. Lessons that could have been learned through instruction are learned through process. This does not mean God becomes harsh. It means He honors free will. He allows choices to unfold so that understanding deepens. But learning through experience often takes longer and costs more than learning through obedience. Another effect of prolonged silence is isolation. When God's voice feels distant, people often feel disconnected not only from Him, but from purpose. Joy becomes inconsistent. Confidence wavers. Even faith can feel mechanical. This is not because faith is gone, but because intimacy hath been interrupted. Intimacy thrives on responsiveness. When responsiveness slows, intimacy weakens. The silence that follows disobedience is also difficult to break because it requires humility to address. Pride resists return. Pride says, "If God wanted me to move, He would speak again." Humility says, "If God spoke once, I should respond." Many remain in silence not because God refuses to speak, but because the heart resists acknowledging delay. Silence persists until honesty appears. It is important to understand that God does not punish silence with more silence. Silence is not retaliation. It is restraint. God restrains further instruction until the previous instruction is honored. This preserves order. If God continued adding direction without response, confusion would multiply. Silence simplifies the issue. It brings everything back to the unresolved point of obedience. Some people attempt to break silence by increasing activity, more prayers, more effort, more searching. But noise does not restore clarity. Obedience does. Silence is not broken by volume. It is broken by alignment. When the heart turns back toward what was avoided, communication often resumes naturally, sometimes immediately. There is also fear associated with prolonged silence. Fear that it will never end. Fear that too much time has passed. Fear that opportunity hath been lost permanently. While some seasons are indeed missed, God's mercy always leaves room for return. But restoration after delay often looks different than progress through obedience. The destination may remain, but the path changes. This is why the warning matters now. Archangel Michael is not saying silence will be eternal. He is saying it will not be easily broken. Easy paths close when simple obedience is ignored. What could have been resolved through one step may require many. What could have been clarified through response may require endurance. Silence after disobedience also tests desire. Do you want God's voice or do you want comfort? Do you want clarity or do you want familiarity? Silence forces these questions to the surface. It reveals whether the heart truly longs for alignment or merely relief. This part of the message is not meant to discourage you. It is meant to sober you. Awareness now can prevent prolonged struggle later. You are being shown what is at stake not to frighten you, but to empower you. Knowing the weight of silence helps you value the moment when God is still speaking. Right now, the silence has not settled in fully. The warning itself is proof of that. Instruction is still present. Direction is still accessible. But the window is not indefinite. The longer response is delayed, the more effort return requires. The silence that follows disobedience is difficult not because God is distant, but because the heart must travel further to reach Him again. Tonight is an invitation to shorten that distance, to respond while clarity is still near, to move while the signal is still active. What happens next depends on whether this warning becomes action or remains information. Silence can still be avoided. Alignment is still possible. But the choice must be made before quiet becomes heavy and direction becomes harder to hear. February 10th stands as a turning point, not because the date itself holds power, but because God assigns meaning to moments. Throughout time, certain days become martyrs, lines drawn in the spirit that separate what was from what will be. These moments are not always announced loudly. Often, they arrive quietly, carrying weight that is only understood in hindsight. This is one of those days, a crossroads where continuation and change stand facing each other, and neutrality is no longer an option. In spiritual matters, timing is everything. The same action taken in one season can produce fruit, while taken too late, it produces struggle. February 10th represents the end of allowance and the beginning of consequence, not in punishment, but in progression. What has lingered unresolved is being addressed. What had been delayed is being called forward. God does not rush people, but He does move moments. When a moment passes, it does not return in the same form. This turning point is not only about what happens next, but about what can no longer remain the same. Certain patterns, habits, and cycles have reached their limit. They have taught what they were meant to teach. Prolonging serves no purpose now. God's mercy has allowed time for awareness to grow, and now awareness must become action. February 10th is the hinge between knowing and doing. Some people expect turning points to feel dramatic, but many feel deceptively ordinary. Life may look the same on the surface. Responsibilities remain. Routines continue. But internally, something shifts. A sense of finality settles in. A realization that this is the last moment to choose differently without added difficulty. Turning points rarely announce themselves with noise. They reveal themselves through urgency. This state also represents accountability. Not condemnation, but ownership. God is bringing clarity to the fact that what happens next will be shaped largely by response, not circumstance. Waiting for external change will no longer work. The invitation is inward. Alignment must begin internally before it manifests externally. February 10th calls for responsibility, not blame. There is also mercy woven into this turning point. God does not expose urgency without offering direction. He does not reveal the end of one season without opening the door to another. But transition requires release. You cannot step into what is ahead while clinging tightly to what is behind. This day marks the release point, the moment when holding on becomes heavier than letting go. For some, February 10th represents movement after stagnation. For others, it represents restraint after recklessness. Turning points do not always push forward. Sometimes they redirect. God is not interested in speed without accuracy. He is interested in alignment that lasts. This date is about correction as much as it is about progression. You may feel a heightened sense of awareness today. Thoughts sharper. Conviction clearer. Restlessness stronger. This is not coincidence. Turning points heighten sensitivity. God sharpens perception so decisions are made consciously, not casually. This is not a moment to drift. It is a moment to decide. Some will attempt to ignore the significance of this day, hoping nothing changes. But turning points are not neutralized by avoidance. They still pass, and what follows them still unfolds. The only difference is whether one moves with awareness or is carried by consequence. God's desire is always awareness. February 10th also closes certain doors quietly, not out of cruelty but out of necessity. Doors that lead back to old patterns, familiar excuses, and repeated cycles begin to lose accessibility. This can feel uncomfortable, even frightening. But closed doors protect as much as open ones invite. God closes what no longer serves purpose. This turning point is deeply personal. While many are experiencing the same date, each person stands at a unique intersection. The instruction is specific. The response required is individual. Comparison will only create confusion. God is not asking you to respond like someone else. He's asking you to respond honestly. There is also peace available in this turning point. Not the peace of avoidance, but the peace of clarity. Knowing that a decision has been made. Knowing that delay has ended. Knowing that obedience, even when challenging, brings rest that indecision never can. February 10th offers that peace to those willing to move. God does not measure turning points by success or failure, but by response. Even a small step taken in alignment matters more than a perfect plan delayed indefinitely. This day is not about having everything figured out. It is about choosing direction. As this turning point unfolds, understand that God remains near. He does not issue warnings and then disappear. He watches response closely. He supports movement. He meets those who choose alignment with clarity, provision, and renewed communication. The silence that preceded this moment was preparation. The signal that marks this day is activation. February 10th will pass like any other day on the calendar. But spiritually, it marks a division. What follows will reflect what was chosen here. This is not meant to create fear, but focus. You are not being rushed. You are being invited. Turning points are gifts, even when they feel heavy. They prevent longer detours. They shorten future struggle. They call forth courage that has been dormant. This day is such a gift. How it shapes what comes next depends not on what you feel, but on what you decide to do with what you now know. Recognizing the signal before it passes requires stillness, not striving. God's voice is rarely competing with noise. It waits for quiet. That is why this moment matters so deeply. The signal being released is not hidden, but it is gentle enough to be overlooked by a distracted heart. Discernment in moments like this is not about spiritual skill. It is about spiritual posture. Those who slow down will notice what those who rush past will miss. The first step in recognizing the signal is honesty. God often speaks clearest where we have been least truthful with ourselves. Ask inwardly, without defensiveness, what has remained unresolved. The signal will point there, not to overwhelm you, but to clarify. God does not scatter instruction. He aims it. The signal will not feel random. It will feel specific. Another way the signal reveals itself is through interruption. Something disrupts your usual rhythm. A thought you cannot shake. A discomfort that refuses to leave. A sudden clarity about what must change. These interruptions are not inconveniences. They are invitation. God interrupts what no longer serves alignment. If something keeps pressing for attention, it is likely because heaven is pressing gently but firmly. Discerning the signal also requires removing excess noise. Distraction is the enemy of recognition. Constant input dulls spiritual sensitivity. That is why tonight matters. The signal is clearest when the soul is not crowded. Step away from what numbs awareness, even briefly. Stillness sharpens hearing. Silence reveals direction. Fear often tries to disguise itself as caution during these moments. It asks for more time, more confirmation, more reassurance. But discernment recognizes the difference between wisdom and delay. Wisdom brings peace even when action is challenging. Delay brings relief that quickly turns into restlessness. The signal will carry peace beneath the pressure. That is how you know it is from God. Another indicator of the signal is alignment with truth you already know. God does not contradict himself. What he reveals now will resonate with what he has shown you before. The signal may not introduce new information, but it will add urgency to old understanding. That urgency is not panic, it is precision. It is also important to recognize that obedience does not always feel dramatic. Sometimes it feels ordinary. A decision made quietly, a habit released privately, a step taken without applause. God values obedience even when no one else sees it. The signal is not asking for display. It is asking for response. Discerning the signal also means resisting comparison. God speaks uniquely. What obedience looks like for one person may look different for another. Comparison clouds discernment. Focus sharpens it. The signal you receive is tailored to your assignment, not someone else's journey. If you are unsure whether what you are sensing is truly from God, examine the fruit. Does it lead toward humility, clarity, and alignment? Or toward fear, confusion, and pressure? God's signal may challenge you, but it will not manipulate you. It invites, not coerces. It clarifies, not confuses. Another key to recognition is timing. The fact that this message reached you when it did is part of the signal. God orchestrates encounters. Nothing arrives late or early by accident. If you are hearing this now, it is because your heart is able to respond now. Delay only complicates what obedience could simplify. As you discern, remember that response does not require full understanding. God rarely explains everything at once. He reveals enough for the next step. Light follows movement. Clarity increases after obedience begins. Waiting for complete certainty often results in missed opportunity. This is also a moment to release distractions that feel harmless but consume attention. Not everything that is allowed is aligned. The signal may ask you to let go of something that is not sinful, but distracting. Discernment recognizes that alignment often requires subtraction before addition. As this part of the message nears its close, listen inwardly. What feels highlighted? What feels urgent? What feels unavoidable? That is where the signal is pointing. Do not overthink it. Overthinking often drowns discernment. Trust what is being revealed simply. You were not meant to carry confusion into the next season. God is offering clarity now. But clarity requires response. Recognition requires stillness. And obedience requires courage. You will be glad you stayed for what's about to be revealed. Type "I hear the signal" in the comments if this resonates with you. Blessing code 528 is now activated. As this signal becomes clear to you, hear this invitation from the heart of God. When you give, you help carry this light to souls still standing in silence. The Lord is saying, "Those who release into my work will never lack direction, for I guide the hands that sow into truth." When you support through Super Thanks, channel membership, or PayPal, linked in the description and shown by the QR code, you are not funding content, you are fueling calling. This is a prophetic moment to act, not later, not someday. I bless every giver with clarity, protection, and divine acceleration. Obey now, and let heaven respond to your response. Responding immediately when God speaks is one of the clearest demonstrations of faith. Not loud faith, not dramatic faith, but living, active faith that moves when instruction is given. Delayed obedience often disguises itself as wisdom, caution, or preparation. But when God has already made the direction clear, delay becomes disobedience in slow motion. This moment is not about understanding everything. It is about responding to what has already been revealed. Immediate response does not mean reckless action. It means decisive alignment. It means saying yes internally before circumstances shift externally. God watches for willingness before He releases details. Many people wait for confidence to move, but confidence usually arrives after obedience begins. Movement unlocks clarity. Stillness rarely does. There is power in the first step, not because the step is big, but because it breaks agreement with hesitation. The first step disrupts stagnation. It signals to heaven that you are ready to cooperate with what God is doing. Even small acts of obedience carry weight when they are timely. A conversation initiated, a habit ended, a commitment made, a boundary established. These steps may feel ordinary, but in the spiritual realm, they create momentum. God often responds to immediate obedience with confirmation. Not always instantly, but consistently. Peace settles. Direction sharpens. Resistance weakens. When you move in alignment, opposition loses leverage. Delay gives resistance time to grow. Response starves it. That is why urgency matters now. Not panic, but precision. Many people fear making the wrong move, so they make no move at all. But when God has spoken clearly, the greater risk is inaction. Inaction prolongs uncertainty. It keeps you suspended between seasons. God does not call you to perfection. He calls you to participation. He corrects those who move, not those who freeze. Responding immediately also protects sensitivity. The more quickly you obey, the more attuned you become to God's voice. Obedience sharpens discernment. Delay dulls it. When you act on what you hear, you train your spirit to recognize truth faster. This is how spiritual maturity develops, not through knowledge alone, but through responsiveness. It is important to understand that obedience does not always feel rewarding at first. Sometimes it feels costly. You may lose comfort, familiarity, or approval. But what obedience costs in the short term, it repays in long-term peace. What delay preserves temporarily, it often steals later. God sees beyond the immediate. He calls you to trust His perspective over your comfort. Responding now also honors the timing of this moment. February 10th was identified as a turning point for a reason. Timing carries grace. When you move within the window God provides, things align more smoothly. When you move outside of it, effort increases. This does not mean God abandons you. It means the path becomes harder than necessary. If you are unsure where to start, begin with honesty. Acknowledge to God what you have been avoiding. Confess delay without excuses. This is not about guilt. It is about alignment. God responds quickly to honest hearts. Clarity often follows confession. Then act on the simplest instruction you know. Do not wait for complexity. God often tests obedience with small steps before entrusting larger ones. Faithfulness in simple things opens doors to greater responsibility. Immediate obedience in small matters prepares you for larger assignments. This is also a moment to speak alignment publicly. There is power in declaration. When you verbalize your intention to respond, you strengthen resolve. That is why engagement matters here. If this message is speaking to you, take a moment to comment with what you are choosing to do differently. Share this message so others standing at the same threshold are not left unaware. Subscribe to this channel so you remain connected to what God is revealing in this season. These actions are not about algorithms alone. They are about agreement. Agreement amplifies movement. God often uses the next 24 hours as a proving ground. What you do shortly after hearing instruction matters. Delay tends to creep in quickly. Distractions return. Doubt grows louder. That is why response should be prompt. Act while clarity is fresh. Do not negotiate with what you already know. Immediate obedience also builds spiritual confidence. Each response strengthens your trust in God's voice. Over time, fear loses authority. Confidence grows, not in yourself but in God's faithfulness. You begin to recognize that obedience does not lead to loss, but to alignment. As this part of the message draws toward its close, understand this. You are not being rushed, but you are being called. The signal was not released to inform you, but to activate you. What you do next matters more than what you have done before. God is not measuring your past delays. He is watching your present response. There is more coming. What follows builds directly on how you respond now. And you will want to hear what comes next, because it brings protection, clarity, and assurance that obedience is never wasted. Whenever truth is released at the right time, resistance rises almost immediately. This is not coincidence. It is pattern. Spiritual warfare intensifies not when you are doing nothing, but when you are close to alignment. The moment you begin to recognize God's signal and consider responding, opposition becomes more active. That opposition rarely looks dramatic. It often looks subtle, reasonable, and familiar. Distraction increases. Doubt speaks louder. Fatigue sets in. These are not signs that you are on the wrong path. They are indicators that movement matters. Spiritual warfare surrounding this message is not about fear. It is about interference. The enemy does not need to destroy what he can delay. He does not need to silence you if he can keep you undecided. That is why the greatest pressure often comes right after clarity. Once direction becomes visible, resistance tries to blur it again. Understanding this prevents misinterpretation. You are not subtly confused because God withdrew. You are pressured because alignment fattens opposition. One of the most common tactics is distraction disguised as urgency. Suddenly, everything feels important. Responsibilities multiply. Interruptions appear. Time feels compressed. This is not accidental. When God calls for focused obedience, distraction tries to scatter attention. Discernment recognizes what truly requires immediate response and what can wait. Alignment often requires saying no to good things in order to say yes to the right thing. Another tactic is doubt framed as logic. Thoughts like, is this really from God? Or maybe I should wait a little longer surface. Discernment is not threatened by honest questions, but delay often hides behind endless analysis. When God has already confirmed direction, further questioning becomes avoidance. Warfare often appeals to reason to undermine resolve. Faith responds not by ignoring logic, but by prioritizing obedience over comfort. Fear also plays a role. Fear of loss, fear of change, fear of making a mistake. Fear often exaggerates the cost of obedience while minimizing the cost of delay. But fear does not see the full picture. God does. Obedience may feel risky, but delay carries its own risk, one that often unfolds quietly over time. There is also resistance through emotional fatigue. You may feel unusually tired, unmotivated, or numb. This is not always physical. The spiritual pressure drains energy. That is why rest and stillness are important during moments like this. Not rest that avoids decision, but rest that restores clarity. Warfare thrives in exhaustion. Discernment sharpens in rest. Archangel Michael's presence in this moment signals protection as much as warning. He is not only announcing urgency, he is standing guard. You are not being asked to face resistance alone. Heaven is aware of the pressure surrounding your decision. Protection is available, but it is activated through movement. Standing still leaves you exposed to ongoing pressure. Obedience moves you under covering. It is important to recognize that resistance often peaks right before breakthrough. The closer you are to stepping into alignment, the louder opposition becomes. This does not mean something is wrong. It means something is shifting. Warfare intensifies where progress is imminent. Understanding this keeps you from retreating when pressure rises. Another subtle form of warfare is isolation. You may feel misunderstood or unsupported. Others may not recognize the urgency you feel. This can create doubt about your perception. But alignment is not always affirmed by consensus. Many pivotal decisions are made alone, with God. Isolation does not mean abandonment. It often means focus. Spiritual warfare also tries to resurrect old patterns. Old habits resurface. Old temptations reappear. Old excuses regain appeal. This is not regression. It is resistance attempting to reestablish familiarity. Familiarity feels safe, even when it is misaligned. Discernment recognizes when something returns not because it belongs, but because it fears replacement. Do not be surprised if emotional intensity fluctuates. One moment you feel resolved, the next uncertain. This does not invalidate your decision. It reveals the tension between old patterns and new alignment. Growth often feels unstable before it feels strong. Stability follows commitment. The key in this moment is steadiness. Not emotional steadiness, but directional steadiness. Decide once, then stand. Do not renegotiate internally what God has already made clear. Repeated internal debate weakens your resolve. Clarity strengthens when decisions are settled. Prayer in moments of warfare should focus less on asking God what to do and more on asking for strength to do what you know. God has already spoken. Now He supplies grace to obey. Resistance loses power when obedience becomes non-negotiable. Remember that warfare does not define the outcome. Response does. Pressure does not cancel purpose. Opposition does not outrank authority. What matters most is not what rises against you, but what you choose to stand on. As this part of the message concludes, understand that the presence of resistance confirms the importance of your decision. You are not imagining the weight of this moment. It is real, but so is the support surrounding you. Heaven is not only signaling, it is standing with you. What comes next is not meant to overwhelm you. It is meant to assure you. The message ahead brings restoration, clarity, and hope, reminding you that even now, even after delay, alignment is still possible, and obedience is still met with mercy. Restoration is still possible, and this truth must be spoken clearly before fear has any chance to settle in. God's intention has never been to trap you in silence, loss, or regret. His warnings are not declarations of rejection. They are invitations to return. Even when instruction had been delayed, even when moments have been missed, restoration remains part of God's nature. What changes after delay is not God's willingness, but the process by which restoration unfolds. Many people assume that if they did not respond immediately, they have failed permanently. This belief creates shame, and shame paralyzes movement. But God does not work through shame. He works through truth and mercy. Restoration begins not with self-condemnation, but with honest recognition. Acknowledging delay without hiding, justifying, or minimizing it opens the door to renewal. God responds powerfully to humility. It is important to understand that restoration does not always mean returning to the exact same place you left. Sometimes it means being repositioned. God restores purpose, clarity, and relationship, but the path forward may look different. This is not loss. It is refinement. What matters is not preserving the original plan exactly as imagined, but realigning with God's will as it stands now. Delayed obedience often requires healing before advancement, not because God withholds progress, but because the heart must be strengthened to carry what comes next. Restoration addresses wounds caused by hesitation, fear, or disappointment. God does not rush this process. He is patient, careful, and intentional. He rebuilds trust gently, not forcefully. Restoration also restores communication. Silence does not have to be permanent. When the heart turns back toward obedience, God often resumes speaking in ways that are unmistakable. Sometimes clarity returns gradually. Sometimes it comes suddenly. Either way, restored communication brings peace that silence never could. God delights in being heard and responded to. Another aspect of restoration is perspective. God reframes what felt like wasted time. He does not erase it, but He redeems it. Lessons learned during delay become tools for wisdom moving forward. Sensitivity increases. Discernment sharpens. What once caused confusion can later become a source of guidance. God wastes nothing that is surrendered. Restoration also renews strength. Delay often drains energy. Indecision is exhausting. When alignment is restored, strength returns, not always physically, but internally. Resolve replaces hesitation. Confidence replaces doubt. This strength is not self-generated. It flows from renewed alignment with God's will. It is also important to note that restoration is not always instant. God heals deeply, not quickly. Impatience after delay can sabotage the restoration process. Some want immediate results to compensate for lost time. But God prioritizes wholeness over speed. He rebuilds foundations before adding weight. Trust the pace of restoration. Restoration requires cooperation. God initiates, but the heart must remain responsive. Obedience cannot stop at the first step. Restoration unfolds as continued alignment. Small acts of faithfulness matter greatly in this season. Consistency restores confidence. Faithfulness restores trust. Some may fear that restoration will expose their past delay publicly. But God is discreet. He restores without humiliating. He corrects without shaming. He covers way his. What matters is not who knows about the delay, but who sees the response. God honors those who return quietly and faithfully. Restoration also reopens doors that felt closed permanently. Not all doors reopen, but God opens the right ones. He replaces what is lost with what is needed. Replacement is not downgrade. It is redirection. God's provision is always sufficient for the assignment He gives. If you are listening and feel hope stirring again, that is intentional. Hope is not denial of reality. It is confidence in God's character. Restoration is not based on your performance, but on God's promise. His mercy does not expire quickly. His patience does not wear thin easily. But restoration does require response. This part of the message exists to remind you that it is not too late to realign. Silence does not have to be your future. Distance does not have to define your relationship with God. Restoration is available because God desires closeness more than compliance. He wants your heart, not just your action. As this message prepares to move toward its conclusion, hold on to this truth. God's goal was never to end communication. His goal was to awaken response. If you are willing to respond now, restoration is already in motion. What comes next is the final call, a closing word that gathers everything spoken and releases assurance, peace, and spiritual upliftment. It is not a message of fear but of hope, and it matters how you receive it. This is the final call, not because God is finished speaking forever, but because this moment has reached its conclusion. Everything that needed to be revealed has been revealed. Everything that needed to be clarified has been clarified. What remains now is response. The silence that once hovered has been broken, not to overwhelm you, but to guide you. And as this message comes to a close, it gathers every warning, every signal, every moment of clarity into one simple truth. God spoke because He loves you. February 10th was not meant to pass unnoticed. It was not meant to blend into routine or be dismissed as coincidence. It was a marker, a pause in the flow of time where heaven leaned close and spoke plainly. The silence before this moment was not punishment. It was preparation. The signal released was not threat. It was mercy. And the urgency you felt was not fear, it was care. If you have listened this far, it means something, and you chose awareness over avoidance. That choice matters. God sees it. He honors it. Alignment does not begin with perfection. It begins with willingness. Even now, even at this final moment, God is not standing with arms crossed. He is standing with an open path. This message was never about condemnation. It was about direction. It was not meant to leave you anxious but anchored. God does not warn to scare, He warns to protect. And protection has been surrounding you through every quiet moment, every delay, every unanswered question. Even silence was guarding you from moving prematurely. Now clarity guards you from staying too long. The assurance you need now is this: obedience is never wasted. Even if it comes later than you hoped, even if it costs more than you expected, obedience always leads to life. God restores more than He removes. He replaces more than He restricts. What you release in alignment is never greater than what you gain in peace. The silence that was spoken of does not have to define what comes next. Silence only settles when truth is repeatedly ignored. You are not ignoring it now. You are receiving it. And reception itself is a form of response. God honors movement in the heart before movement in a world. As you step forward from this moment, do not carry fear with you. Fear belongs to uncertainty, not to alignment. Carry clarity. Carry peace. Carry the confidence that God does not abandon those who turn toward Him, even after delay. His mercy is not fragile. His patience is not shallow. His guidance is not easily withdrawn. Let this message end where it was meant to end, in hope that direction has been restored. Hope that silence does not have the final word. Hope that obedience, even now, opens doors that delay tried to close. God is not finished with you. This was never an ending. It was a turning. Whatever step you take next, take it with trust. Not trust in your ability, but trust in God's faithfulness. He does not call without covering. He does not warn without guiding. He does not signal without staying present. Receive this final assurance. You are seen, you are guided, and you are not alone. Heaven spoke because heaven cares. And as this message concludes, peace is being released to replace urgency, and confidence is being released to replace hesitation. Type "I choose alignment" in the comments if this message has reached you. Blessing code 909 is now activated. As this message comes to rest in your spirit, hear this final call. When you give, you are helping God break silence for someone else. The Lord is saying, what you release into my work, I will release back into your life as light, direction, and open heavens. This mission moves because obedient hearts choose to sow. Through super thanks, channel membership, or PayPal, linked in the description and shown by the QR code, You become a vessel God uses to reach those still waiting for a signal. This is not an option. It is an assignment. I bless every giver with multiplied peace, protection, and divine reward. Act now, and let your obedience echo beyond this moment.